Om Sarashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Good. Be seated, please. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome back. Welcome also to the many students who attend this class regularly online. We continue their study of Uddhava Gita. We began this chapter 18, which presents this wonderful story of the Brahmana from Avanti, from Ujjain. And we saw in the prior classes that this Brahmana was extremely miserly. He didn't spend his money for the uplift of himself or for other people. He was just a miser. As a result, he ended up being old and alone, and everyone hated him, and he became deeply depressed. In his depression, he became very detached from worldly life in an unhealthy way, what we called shmashana vairagya, a kind of depression where vairagya means dispassion, a kind of dispassion where you feel like this whole world is useless. Why did God even allow me to be born? That's the words of a depressed person, a deeply depressed person. So in our prior class, we talked quite a bit about this unhealthy vairagya. I frequently used the word shmashana vairagya, the vairagya born of the burning grounds, meaning the kind of vairagya you attain at a time of great loss, a time of death, for example. Let me add something to that. The more common expression, I should say the more scholarly expression, is jihasa vairagya. Shmashana vairagya means vairagya born of the burning grounds, and jihasa vairagya is a more scholarly term. It means a vairagya where jihasa means the desire to get rid of everything. You just want to get out. Just get out of this world, get out of this life, so far. And then we discussed the importance of converting vairagya from that immature form, jihasa vairagya, to a more mature form. This is to recap the prior class. The more mature form, we said, was called viveka janya vairagya, a kind of vairagya which is based not on loss, a kind of vairagya which is born of viveka, understanding, proper discernment. When you properly discern that no matter what you accomplish in life, you will never achieve perfect peace and contentment. That understanding is a very simple but correct way of understanding viveka janya vairagya, this more mature form of vairagya born of discernment. And we saw how in fact, where we ended our class was with this verse. Can you put the verse up, please? Where we ended our class was with this verse that shows a process of transformation in the Brahmana. So he started off with his Jahasa Vairagya, but in this verse and the verses that preceded, it's very clear that his immature Vairagya was converted into a mature Vairagya, Viveka Janya Vairagya. And further, he committed himself to spiritual growth, where he says, apramattaha, without any distraction, atmani siddhaha syat. He says, I will search within myself for perfection. So he's now committing himself to a life of spiritual growth. Apramatta, without distraction, suggests that he also decided to become a sannyasi, a Hindu monk. Previously, he was a pious Brahmana. Now he gives up his life as a Brahmana and he takes to the life of a monk and focuses his intentions entirely focused on spiritual growth. Now, to introduce our next verses. He underwent a lot of self-inquiry and a lot of detachment born of proper understanding, all of which made him completely prepared for enlightenment, ripe for enlightenment, we can say, if we can use that kind of language. When you are ripe for enlightenment, it doesn't take much to get there. Metaphor, if you have a pile of wet twigs and you go on trying to light it with a match, not going to light. When those twigs are completely dry, bone dry, as they say, it just takes one match, right? So he was completely prepared, like that pile of twigs, and we're going to see in the next verse where he becomes enlightened. Now, he's been talking for quite a while, and now instead of listening to the Brahmana's words from his own mouth, we return to the narrator, who is Sri Krishna. So Sri Krishna is narrating this story, and he says, Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Ityabi Pretya Manasa, Ityabi Pretya Manasa, Yavantyo Dvaja Sattamaha, Yavantyo Dvaja Sattamaha, Unmuchya Hridaya Grantin, Shanto Bhikshura Bhun Munihi, Shanto Bhikshuna Bhun Munihi. Second line, he avantyaha, he indeed. Avantyaha, the person from Avanti is Avantyaha, that Brahmana, who is Dvija Sattama. He had become a very pious Brahmana. Earlier, he was a very miserly Brahmana, but with all his contemplation. I left you with an image in the last class that he dug himself a deep hole. And if you remember that, by the way, if you miss a class, you can always find the previous classes online. So he dug himself, metaphorically, a very deep hole. He sat in that deep hole for a long time contemplating. And in his contemplation, he recognized all his shortcomings and came out of a lot of those shortcomings. Eventually, he came out of the hole. So he had undergone a process of transformation in which he was no longer a miserly Brahmana, But now he had become a pious Brahmana. And as I said in the prior verse, apramattaha suggests that he also became a sannyasi. Means after you climb out of the hole, to become a sannyasi means you seek out a teacher, you study under that teacher for a period of time. Eventually that your guru will give you sannyasa, initiate you as a Hindu monk. So that Avantyaha, that now sannyasi from Avanti, from Ujjain, who was Dvija Sattama, who had become a really pious Brahmana. What did he do? First line, iti, thus, abhipretya manasa, abhipretya, having decided, having focused, manasa, having focused his mind on atma vichara, self-inquiry. There's not much, Sri Krishna doesn't say much here. He says a whole lot about atma vichara elsewhere. So having this now new sannyasi, having undergone a process of atma vichara, that's what the first line means, abhipretya, having made this decision, manasa, with his mind, to look within for the sake of discovering his true self. What happened in the third line is unmuchya. He became freed from what? Hridaya grantin, the knots of the heart. This is an expression that actually comes from the Upanishad, and it's an expression that really describes the knots of the heart as a metaphorical way of saying ignorance and all the problems associated with ignorance. Now, ignorance here doesn't mean ignorance in general, it means specifically failure to recognize your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, or the term that you've often heard is the so-called veil of ignorance that covers the true self within. That's what's been removed. And not just the veil of ignorance, but all of the consequences of that veil of ignorance. The consequences of ignorance includes being miserly, which was a huge problem for him earlier in his life. So, having removed the knots of his heart, having removed the veil of ignorance that covers the true self, Satchidananda Atma, which means he became enlightened. That's what it means. When you remove the veil of ignorance covering your true nature, it's already present in your experience, but not fully recognized as what it is. There's no second step. You remove the ignorance, that's it. Because who you truly are, that inner divinity, is already shining. That shining, of course, has been subdued by that so-called veil of ignorance. When you remove that veil, that so-called, I have to say so-called. There's no such thing as a veil of ignorance, it's a metaphor. So having removed that so-called veil of ignorance, then Atma reveals itself, self-shining, self-revealing. Nothing else is required. Therefore, he became enlightened, and it says that in the last line that abhut, the word shantaha, bhikshuhu, abhut. He became shantaha, completely at peace. And he became munihi bhikshuhu. He became a bhikshu, a wandering monk, one who lives on, as explained in the last class, one who lives on alms is called a bhikshu, sannyasi. And he became not just a bhikshu, but a munihi bhikshu. Muni can mean sage, but here it probably means silent. So he became a silent, wandering monk. And this introduces the really interesting part of this chapter, which we'll see now. The story is quite fun. I think you'll enjoy it and has a very important message. So then, having gained enlightenment, actually, if we take the steps, just to review the steps. So he was at the bottom of his hole. He dug himself a hole of depression, and he had the immature vairagya. He contemplated and thought. He also grew old in that hole of depression. And with age, hopefully comes some wisdom, the wisdom of age we call it. So his unhealthy, immature dispassion got converted into healthy dispassion, viveka janya vairagya, and that healthy depression, the healthy dispassion, healthy depression, I don't think so. Healthy dispassion led him on a process of self-inquiry. He dug himself out of that hole. He found himself a guru. He studied with that guru. He eventually became enlightened. He became a sannyasi. And now, what comes next? Sachachara mahim hetam. Sachachara mahim hetam. Samyatatmendriya nilaha. Samyatanendriya nilaha. Bhikshartam nagaragraman. Bhikshartam nagaragraman. Asango lakshito vishata. Asango lakshito vishata. So, saha chachara, he wandered. Where did he wander? Mahim, etam, these, mahim, these lands, this earth. He wandered these lands. How? He was samyata, atma, indriya, anilaha. He's described here as being samyata, controlled. What was under control? Atma here cannot possibly mean Satchidananda Atma. You can't control Atma. Here Atma means mind. So he had control over Atma, his mind, Indriya, his senses, and Anila here, wind, means prana, his life force. So he was completely self-controlled. I mean, it's how you describe an extremely mature person, is one who is completely self-controlled. And then, Sachachara, he went wandering these lands, and last word of the verse, avishata. Avishata, he entered where? In the third line, and Nagara and Graman. He entered many Nagara, cities, and Grama, and villages. And why did he go to these cities and villages? Well, he is bhikshartam. Bhiksha artam, you won't find anything to eat out in the fields. You find something to eat where people live. So he would go to towns and villages in search of alms. There was a tradition back in the day when you stand in front of a home and you call out, Bhavati Bhikshan Dehi. Bhavati, O lady of the house, Dehi, please give Bhikshan, alms. This was the ancient tradition. It's pretty much gone, I'm afraid. So anyway, he goes from village to village begging alms, but with a certain attitude. He was asangaha, completely detached. Detached means if you call out Bhavati Bhikshan Dehi, suppose no one comes to the door. Happens. Then you go to the next house. Bhavati Bhikshan Dehi. No one comes to the door. Go to the third house. Bhavati Bhikshan Dehi. No one comes to the door. The old rule for sannyasis is 3 times and you're out. You're not permitted to keep begging and begging and begging. So if you don't get alms after 3 tries, you have to go to another town or village. That's the rule. They used to follow that. So he was detached in the sense that if no one came to the door once, twice, or three times, he was okay what to do. If you get alms, you get alms. If you don't, then you go to the next village. Remember, we're talking about an enlightened bhikshu. There are plenty who are yet to be enlightened. This one is absolutely enlightened also. He would go into these towns and villages alakshitaha, without alakshitaha literally not being recognized. Earlier, he said munihi, Sri Krishna described him as silent. So he wouldn't speak, he wouldn't call attention to himself. I suppose the tradition, there was a tradition, again, gone today, where a sannyasi would go into a village and start teaching. And then when you start teaching, then you draw people. When you draw people, then it becomes very easy to get bhiksha, to get alms. He didn't. He was alakshitaha. He didn't say anything. No one recognized him as a teacher. He was well taught by his guru, but alakshitaha, no one recognized that because he didn't make any effort to teach. He only made the effort to collect alms. And that one interesting consequence of that lifestyle, we'll see. Tam vai pravaya sambhikshum, tam vai pravaya sambhikshum, avadhutam asajjanaha, avadhutam asajjanaha, drishtva paryabhavan bhadra, drishtva paryabhavan drishtva, bahvibhih paribhutibhih, bahvibhih paribhutibhih. So tam, start in the second line end. Asad janaha is the word. Janaha, people. But people who are asat, not good. Not good people. Here we're talking about he went into some village where people were uneducated. They were old-fashioned. So think, this is the image you need to understand the story. So he wanders into a particular village where people are very old-fashioned. What is the word I'm looking? Anyway, so very old-fashioned, very simple but uneducated, very clannish people. Yeah, kind of inward turned. And drishtva in the third line, having seen him. Now go up to the top. Drishtva, having seen tam, having seen him. Having seen whom? The pravayasam bhikshum. The bhikshu, the sannyasi who was begging, who was pravayasam, very elderly, having seen the old beggarly sage who was avadhutam. Avadhuta is an interesting word. It's used in a variety of contexts. It's actually used for an enlightened person in a particular sense. The root meaning of avadhuta is one who is shaken off. That's the literal meaning of it. Avadhuta, one who has shaken off what? Well, at one level, one who has shaken off worldly life. So no family, no job, no conventional activities, a sannyasi. So one who has shaken off worldly life, but then in a more profound sense, one who has shaken off ignorance, one who has shaken off identification with the body and mind. Now we get a more profound meaning of avadhuta. So one who has transcended this worldliness completely. So that pravayasam bhikshum, that old bhikshu who was enlightened. What about him? Third line end. The bhikshu, Sri Krishna addresses Uddhava here. O Uddhava, Bhadra. O blessed one. Sri Krishna addresses Uddhava. He says that those people in the village, what did they do when this old beggarly sannyasi came into the village? What did they do? Pariyabhavan. They insulted him. Pari plus bhu. They insulted him. Bahu bihi, paribhuti bihi, with many insults. They cursed him with many insults. And you're thinking, wait a minute, in Hindu culture, somebody wearing these robes walks into a village, they're usually treated with great respect. Not in this village. This village had some problem. That's why Sri Krishna says the people of this village were asat janaha in the end of the second line. They were not good people. They were not educated. They were this idea of clannish. And to understand what can happen. Suppose you walk into a village in India. People will look at you. By the way, they'll make you out as if you're from India, they'll make you out as an NRI instantly. They will know you're not from around here, and they'll assume that you're a Videshi. You are Indian, all right, but you definitely are not a local. And in some villages, there's a little problem. Fear of strangers is not uncommon. That happens a lot in small places, and especially in small places where people are not very mature, not highly educated. That happens all over the world. Honestly, if you or I were to walk into a little village in this country, you say, who are you? What are you doing here? I mean, because they feel protective of their little village. When I say little village, I mean like 100 people kind of village. So people feel protective when somebody comes in who is a stranger. There's a word that's come into language. They become othered. Othered, you get the sense? Othered means you're not us. You're other. And here's the problem. Many people think if you're not one of us, you're other, and other, sadly, becomes the enemy. This happens all over the world. People who are of another race, othered. People who are of a different ethnicity, they become othered. People who are of a different religion get othered. And the problem is once you've become othered, you become subject to discrimination around the world. Is it not so? Wherever you look, wherever there is a racial or ethnic or religious conflict, you'll find one group others the other group, and that creates a division, and that also creates strife. Because once a group has been othered, they're treated like an enemy. And being treated like an enemy means they become fair game for discrimination, even for harmful deeds. And that apparently is what happened in this unusual situation. This bhikshu walks into this little village, and he becomes othered. And people are threatened by him. They don't want him there. So if they want him to go away. So what do? They start to insult him. But here's the problem. Usually, if a stranger comes and and the villagers insult the stranger, usually they leave. He didn't leave. And we'll find out why as we go along. He didn't leave. Yeah, they're insulting him. He just bore the insults But then things got even worse. It says, Ke chitravenam jagrahur, Ke chitravenam jagrahur, Eke patram kamandalum, Eke patram kamandalum, Pitam chaike Kshasutrancha, Pitam chaike Kshasutrancha, Kantam chirani kechana, Kantam chirani kechana. So it got pretty bad. So Kechet, some of those villagers, what did they do? Jagrihuhu, they took, they grasped. They grasped what? Trivenum. Venu is bamboo. Trivenu is a group of 3 bamboo sticks tied together, often covered in orange cloth, which is a symbol carried by some sannyasis. So apparently, this bhikshu's guru, who initiated him, was a Tridandi sannyasi. There are different traditions. So Tridandi sannyasi is a tradition of sannyasa where they carry a staff, and that staff consists of 3 bamboo sticks tied together. So he carried that bamboo staff, and what did they do? They grabbed it from him. And that, to a sannyasi, that's a huge insult. Not only that, AK, others from the village, what they took his patram, his begging bowl, and his kamandalum, his water pot, and then in the third line, you see that cha ak, and yet others took his pitam. Sometimes they carry a mat that they sit on to meditate. So they took his mat and they took his akshasutram, his rudraksha mala. Like, can you imagine a sannyasi being treated like that? And you think, can it get worse? Yes. Kechana, some of them took his kantam. Kantam is a shawl made of patchwork. So old pieces of cloth that are stitched together to make a shawl, they took that, and they took also his chirani. Chirani means any kind of cloth that you're wearing, like the Sanghavastram. Let us presume they didn't take his dhoti, but they pretty much took everything else. Okay, now, this is verse 34. This text goes on and on describing all the abuses that the villagers did. I took the liberty of skipping over some of these verses. As I said, it's a long chapter, and we really want to get the story, so we're abbreviating a little bit. So there are many verses talking about how he was abused by these villagers. We're skipping over most of those verses, and we continue. Kshipantyet keva jananta, Kshipantyet keva jananta, Esha dharma dvaja shataha, Esha dharma dvaja shataha, Kshina vitta imam vrittim, Kshina vitta imam vrittim, Agrahit swajanojjitaha, Agrahit swajanojjitaha. So, Kshipanti AK. You have to find that word AK. Some of those villagers of Ajanantaha who were cursing him, some of those who were cursing him, insulting him, some of them, kshipanti, they accused him. They accused him in what way? The second line. They said, Eshaha, this fellow, is a dharma dvajaha shataha. He is a shataha. He is a pretender. a deceiver. He's a deceitful person who is dharma dvaja. He just appears to be a sannyasi. Dharma dvaja, it's interesting. There's some sarcastic statements in Sanskrit. I think we saw one before, Brahma Bandhu. A friend of a brahmana means someone you want to avoid. So it's a sarcastic idiom. Here's another sarcastic idiom, dharma dvaja, a flag of righteousness, means the opposite. It's a sarcastic idiom. So they considered him to be a pretender, someone who pretended to be a sannyasi, someone, in fact, who didn't follow dharma at all, and they accused him in this way in the third line. They said that he was kshina vittaha. Actually, that part is right. Someone who lost his wealth is kshina vittaha, and at the end of the verse, someone who is swajana ujjitaha, someone who has been thrown out by his family. That much is correct, right? He was kshina vittaha, he had lost his wealth, and he was swajana ujjitaha, he was thrown out by his family. But for this reason, the people of that village assumed that he had agrahit. In the last line, agrahit, he took on, in the third line, imam vrittim. This vritti, this mode of life as a wandering monk. So they accused him of being a pretender, a fake sannyasi. There's no shortage of them, of course. So they accused him of being a fake sannyasi, and he was a fake sannyasi. They supported it by saying he was someone who was thrown out by his family, so he took to this lifestyle for the sake of supporting himself. Okay, pretty bad behavior. But just an observation before we move on here. You'd say, how could people treat a sannyasi with so much disrespect? I suggested because he got othered. So someone who deserves respect, but then when they are othered, he's not from our village, he's not of our race, not in this case, but other examples of being othered. He's not of our same race, he's not of our ethnicity, he's not of our, our religion. So in that way, he's othered. By the way, we see that happening all the time. People who deserve respect get othered and then get mistreated. What is happening now? In war zones, what happens? You know, I don't want to get into politics right now, but what's going on in Gaza is Palestinians are othered, and therefore they become subject to being bombed. I know that, again, let's not get into politics. We understand the very complicated origin of that war. But the fact is, today, people who are deserving of respect in Gaza are being bombed. The news recently has had examples of medical doctors apparently being targeted and killed in Gaza. A medical doctor who is there to serve the people who have been injured, the medical doctor was apparently targeted. This is what is the consequence of othering. I'm not sure if that word has made it into the dictionary yet. It might have. You can look it up and see. If it's not there yet, it will be. They keep adding words to the dictionary, othered and othering. So this goes on today, does it not? It happened in the time of Sri Krishna and the bhikshu, and it happens even today, and I guess the reason to point this out is there might be situations in which you might other someone else. Now, probably not because of race or ethnicity, probably not. Religion, possibly. Many Hindus have ill feelings towards Muslims. And again, another complicated situation. What happened during partition was so horrible and ugly. If you lived through that, or if you had relatives who lived through it, you understand the riots in, I think, 84 or whatever, all of this. There's plenty of reason for there to be animosity between Hindus and Muslims, but that was then. What about today? Today, there's no reason to other Muslim. There's no reason for Hindus today to other Muslims, whether it's in India, it's in this country, or anywhere else. What are some other examples of othering? This may be an issue for some of you. Someone who has a sexuality that is unconventional. If you other the person, that is the first step towards harming the person. To other a person doesn't in and of itself cause harm, but it opens the door for mistreatment. And we can see that happening in this country. In the 80s and 90s, many laws were passed to protect the rights of sexual minorities. Those rules, those laws passed in the 80s and 90s are being overthrown in today's time. Laws passed to protect sexual minorities are being removed. What's going on? This is evidence of othering. And again, to other opens the door to mistreatment. Those laws were passed to protect the rights of these sexual minorities, and when those laws go away, they become vulnerable. So important, I think, to pay attention to this problem. We'll call it the problem of othering. And somebody please check and send me an email. I want to know if that word is that word in the dictionary, othering. I have no idea. Okay, let us continue. Evam sabhautikam dukkam, evam sabhautikam dukkam, daivikam daihikam chayata, daivikam daihikam chayata, bhoktavyam atmanodishtam, bhoktavyam atmanodishtam, praptam abudhyata, praptam abudhyata. Look at the very beginning and very end of the verse. Evam, thus, saha, he, no, at the end, abudhyata, he understood. Thus he understood. Okay, what did he understand? Remember, he was taught by a guru. He became enlightened. He also had the benefit of age. Some people grow old and don't grow inside. Others grow much more mature with age. When I look at myself back when I was young, if I think of myself in my 20s, I cringe. So, and that's a good thing. It means that I've come to a place today, years later, decades later, where I can look back and say, oh my gosh, I was cringeworthy. I bet that word is in the dictionary. I'm sure of that. All right. So, evam saha abudhyata. Thus he understood. What did he understood? He understood dukkam. That the world includes suffering. And some of that suffering is bhautikam. Here, bhautikam refers to suffering caused by other people. Some of that suffering is daivikam. And here, daivikam refers to nature. And some of that suffering is daihikam, natural to this body. This is actually a reference to an important teaching called the Tapatraya. Tapatraya, 3 kinds of suffering. 3 kinds of suffering are adhibhautikam, suffering caused by other people, adhidaivikam, suffering caused by the laws of nature, and suffering which is adhyatmikam, caused by one's own body and mind. And because of this tapatraya, these 3 sources of suffering, that's exactly why we chant Shanti 3 times. I ask children, why do we only chant 3? Why stop at 3? If chanting Shanti, this is good for children, if chanting Shanti is a prayer for peace, then why stop at 3? Why not 33 times? Why not 333 times? So the reason, of course, is what I just said. There are 3 sources of suffering, tapatraya, and the 3 sources are suffering caused by other people, like people in the village, suffering caused by, here he says, daivikam, nature. When it's really cold out, our bhikshu is just dressed in his shawl, and he gets cold. When it's hot, he doesn't have an air-conditioned house to go and sit in and cool off, so he suffers due to nature. Also, daihikam. In these other expression is adhyatmikam, suffering caused by one's own body and mind. He's getting quite old. So we all know how it feels when we get old. It hurts more and more. So he understands that all 3 kinds of suffering are natural in life, are inevitable in life, and the key here is in the second half. He understood that bhoktavyam atmanaha dishtam. Atmanaha dishtam, whatever is dishtam, whatever literally directed for you. There's a nice American expression, whatever happens to be on your plate. You know that expression? That's nice. On your plate means whatever situation confronts you, whatever situation you happen to find yourself in. Atmanha dishtam, whatever situation that you are confronted by, he says those situations, bhoktavyam, have to be experienced, have to be endured. And the last line, praptam, each time they occur, again and again and again, whatever happens is bhoktavyam, should be endured. And this introduces something that Sri Krishna really wants to teach. I have skipped a bunch of verses, so let me make sure it's really clear. The subject matter here is titiksha, forbearance. But titiksha means more than just a forbearance. It means effortless forbearance. So this idea of titiksha is usually translated as forbearance, but does it mean, oh, I have to put up with you? That's forbearance. And it means I really have to try hard not to react when you say and do certain things. That's a kind of forbearance, but that's not really titiksha, as Sri Krishna is teaching it here. He's teaching it through the life of this bhikshu. Notice that when the villagers started insulting him and cursing him, 2 verses back, and they were trying to chase him off, I suppose. They didn't want him hanging out in their village. So they say some bad things to him and hope that he goes away. I commented in that verse that he didn't go away. Why not? Usually, if someone insults you, you'll do one of two things. If you're less mature, you'll insult the person back. If you're more mature, you'll simply walk away. So that's how most people behave. If you're insulted, what do they say? Fight or flight. Basic human behavior, fight or flight. Either strike back or walk away. What did our bhikshu do? Neither. Neither fight nor flight. Why? So fight or flight is a normal human response that takes place when we feel threatened. Not just we. Any animal, even plants, I understand, can have some of this response. So any living creature that's threatened is pre-programmed with this instinct, fight or flight. Then why was this bhikshu so different? He didn't respond by shouting back at the villagers, nor did he respond by walking away from the village. Why? He didn't feel threatened. Think about that just for a moment. He didn't feel threatened. That's one of the consequences of gaining enlightenment, one of the blessings, one of the benefits of gaining enlightenment. Because, let's give some examples. Suppose someone insults you. They make a comment about your clothing. So if you're mature, you'll know that, okay, I'm not my clothing. If they don't like my clothing, who cares? But suppose they go further and say, you look funny. Your eyes are like this, or your mouth is like that, or your nose is whatever. So it's easier with clothing, but it's a little harder when somebody starts criticizing your physical appearance, or when they start criticizing your personality, they start criticizing your behavior. That's hard to take without feeling threatened, because you're identified. If you're identified with your clothing, you'll feel insulted. If you're identified with your body, as most people are, you'll feel insulted. If you're identified with your mind, you'll feel insulted when somebody insults your behavior. What about our enlightened bhikshu? He was identified with Satchidananda Atma. So if they criticize, if they shout insults, they know that they're not insulting him. They're insulting someone else, not him. Oh, there's a wonderful joke. It's been told so much that really illustrates this problem of reacting to insults. I blanked out on the. I have to get the punchline right, otherwise. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. Okay, 3 guys standing on the street corner. You shout out, "Hey, George." George turns around. "Hey, Sam." Sam turns around if you call out from a distance. And if you say, hey, Charlie, Charlie turns around. But if you call out from an distance, hey, you idiot, all three of them all three of them turn around. They think you're talking about them. This is the problem. And it's a problem most people have, but our enlightened sannyasi doesn't have. So when people were cursing, by the way, how do you curse Satchidananda Atma? How do you curse pure consciousness? Your consciousness is too pure. Doesn't make sense. So he took those curses as not pertaining to his true self, and further, as this verse, as our current verse, this verse 41 says, he took it in the sense that this is inevitable in life. Suffering and pain and difficulty is inevitable in life. He understood it is atmanaha dishtam. It was on his plate, so to speak. It's what karma had brought into his life. Therefore, bhoktavyam. It's just to be accepted. Praptam, praptam. Whatever comes, even if it happens again and again, just accept it. But there's a tricky word here. That expression, just accept it. Suppose you've just had a huge problem in life. For example, you've had an investment go south, as they say. You've lost a lot of money, and a well-meaning family member who happens to understand your financial situation, they pat you on the shoulder and they say, well, you'll just have to accept it. Tell me, how does it feel when someone says that? And of course, they're trying to be helpful. Is it helpful? It's not helpful. In fact, it can be very hurtful, depending on the situation. You just have to accept it. I like the American expressions. You have to suck it up. What an expression. I don't even know what that means. Anyway, you have to tough it out. There's another one. Not helpful, absolutely. But notice our sannyasi here, did he have to just suck it up? He didn't feel threatened in the first place. He was okay. Here, we'll stay with the American lingo. Our bhikshu was chill. How's that? He was okay. He didn't react to the insults because he didn't feel threatened by the insults. He was absolutely okay. He understood that these simple-minded villagers are just like that. What can you do? Some people are just like that. Tell me, a cat might rub up against you, or a cat might take its claw and scratch you. Is that normal or not? Both. That's the way cats are. Sometimes they rub up against you, sometimes they scratch you. That's the way cats are. Can you accept that? This bhikshu could accept the fact that in some villages, people are just like this. They're old-fashioned, they're very clannish, they're afraid of strangers, etc. So he just accepted it. He didn't have any negative reaction at all, even when they took his staff, when they took his begging bowl and water pot, when they took his seating mat and his Rudraksha mala, and when they took his shawl, he would, what would he think? He says, some people, my Hindi is bad, I'm warning you. Kuch log aisa hi hai. Is that correct? Sort of? Good. Some people are just like that. Kya karenge? What can you do? What a healthy attitude. You can have this attitude only when you don't feel threatened. And that is the purpose of spiritual life. In spiritual life, you gradually become less and less identified with all this external hardware and software. You become less identified with it. You become increasingly identified with your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. And to the extent that this shift of inner identification has taken place, to that extent, you won't be threatened by anything. It's interesting to describe enlightenment in terms of, I've been using the word threatened. The word that comes in the Upanishads is abhayam, fearless. Means exactly what I'm talking about, not feeling threatened. Definitely your body can be threatened, but if you're not identified with it, it's okay. Definitely your emotions can be threatened. But if you're not identified with your personality, you won't be threatened. And you've already discovered this in some measure in your life. As you grow, you become more mature, you become more understanding, you're able to put up with more things. Anyone who grows more mature, this titiksha naturally grows. Suppose you have this titiksha, this natural understanding and forbearance. Suppose you have it times 100, times 1,000. This is enlightenment. One way of understanding enlightenment is to walk out in the world, see reality for what it is, but without being afraid of anything, without being threatened by anything. Doesn't mean you're naive and allow people to abuse you, although arguably this bhikshu did. And maybe we'll talk about that another time. We're going to end our class here. I'm not suggesting that you ignore threats to your body and mind. That's foolish, that's naive. But what I am saying, and what Sri Krishna is saying here, is that with spiritual growth, you find that you're not threatened by anything. And that takes the difficulty out of life, takes the suffering out of life. And that's the blessing of these teachings. Okay, this is a good place to conclude our class today. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our Vedanta class at 10 o'clock, followed by Satsanga, question answer at 11. Please come and join us. And we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Gananahan tva ganapatigam avamahe kaving kavinam upamashravastamam jyeshtarajam brahmanam brahmanaspataha nashranvan utvasvira saranam. Om Mahaganapataye Namaha. Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha. Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.